In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to find the inverse of linear equations. So I'm going to do one example on that. So let's take a look, and notice I did write some steps for you to help you out on the right hand side, as well as my commentary that's going to go through this video. So the first thing that we want to do is step one, we want to prepare for it. And our ideal is that we want to switch the x and y. That's why we call it the inverse. Remember that inverse operations, for instance, the inverse operation of addition is subtraction. The inverse of multiplication is division. And it's the same idea, except for when we talk about the inverse of a function, we're switching the y value, represented by f of x, and the x. So what I recommend doing before switching x and y is to go ahead and make sure you have a y inside of your function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just rewrite f of x as y. And you'll notice that as I'm doing this, I'm going to be go ahead and using pink for the y and x so that you can see where it's going, where it's moving to. I'm just going to go ahead and rewrite this whole equation now. We have negative 8x plus 4. So now I'm ready to go ahead and switch the x and the y. So I'm going to circle it. The x is going to move over to the left where the y is, and the y is going to move over to the right in the position of the x. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to put an x over here. Instead of y equals, it's now x equals. And we have negative 8. And instead of x, I'm going to put the y right there in its place. Plus 4. So now you can clearly see that I have rewritten this function with the x and the y swapped. So now we're ready for step 2. Now step 2 is, our ideal here is that we want to isolate the variable y. And so step 2 is going to have us use inverse operations to move the constant. Remember, constant is just a number that doesn't have a variable. So I'm going to move this positive 4. Now since it's positive 4 and I want to move it to the left side of the equal sign, I'm going to subtract 4. Now remember, whatever we do to one side of the equation, we must do to the other side of the equation. So I'm also going to subtract 4 on the left side of the equation. Now 4 minus 4 becomes 0, so that cancels. And then I'm just going to rewrite what we have over here. So this is x minus 4. Now don't be tempted to go ahead and subtract 4 from x, because remember, we can't, right? One's a variable and one's a constant. So we're just going to rewrite them right beside each other. And then I'll bring down what's left over right here, which is negative 8 and y. I'm going to move this up just a little bit. Now the next step is we're going to divide the coefficient of y, because that's how we isolate it, right? Right now negative 8 is being multiplied to y. So we want to do the inverse operation, which is to divide y by negative 8. So I'm going to draw a line to make it a fraction, right? That's just my division sign. So we're going to divide out negative 8. Now if we divide it on the right side, we also must divide it on the left side. And when I do the division, I'm going to write it as separate fractions, because I have a bad tendency where if I just put negative 8 underneath there and put a single line, which is how a lot of people would write it, I forget that I have to divide that negative 8 into both terms, right, that are separated by a subtraction. Now I do know on the right side over here that negative 8 will go into negative 8 positive 1 times. And that just leaves me with a positive y. Now when it comes to these fractions here, I recommend that you always put them in a calculator and see if they can be simplified. Sometimes they can, sometimes they can't. So I'm going to get my calculator, put it right up here. And I'm first going to go ahead and I'm going to do this one on the right hand side. So I have negative 4 over negative 8. So I'm going to hit alpha y equals. So I can go ahead and get my fraction bar, and I'll put negative 4 as my numerator and negative 8 as my denominator. Hit enter, and notice it changes to 1/2. Not only 1/2, but it's a positive 1/2. So this, once I simplify it, is 1 over 2, and it's a positive. Now on this one it's much simpler, right? Because remember, there's always an invisible 1 in front of every variable. So really this is just 1 over negative 8, and nothing's going to change there. So I'm going to write that down. I have 1 over 8, and it is negative, so negative 1 over 8, and then the x comes after it. Alright, so we're a lot closer to being done now. notice we did that next step, which said step 4, simplify fractions if possible. In this case, -4 over -8 did simplify to 1/2. 1 over -8 did not simplify any further because the numerator is 1, but we rewrote it nice and neat. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to step 5. So let me come down just a little bit. Now on step 5, notice it says write this slope, or write in slope-intercept form. So we want to write it like y equals mx plus b. In other words, we're going to rewrite this and move the y over here to the left, right? So the y has got to come over here to the left. So it's going to be y is equal to -1 over 8. So -1 over 8 x plus 1/2. And we're almost done. We just have one more step to do and we'll be finished. So I'm going to move this down a little bit more. And notice my final step, step 6, it actually says to write the final answer using function notation indicating inverse. Now notice over here it says f of x to the -1. Normally we just use f of x, right? But now you're in Algebra 2 and we have this -1 symbol. And that just indicates to a mathematician that this is an inverse function. So what I'm going to do is y is no longer going to be y. It's going to change back into f of x. So I'm going to write f of x to the -1, right? And then I'm going to bring down my equal sign. And then everything else is going to come down just as normal. So -1 over 8 x plus 1/2. And that is my final answer. So I have written the inverse function of what we started with, which was f of x equals -8x plus 4. So I'm going to write right here, final answer. And you can go back and review this video if you need to, and pause it as much as needed to make sure that you follow these steps correctly to solve any that you have and convert them to the inverse equation or inverse function.